Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Eric Joyce. I will be your host today for PreScouter's COP26 Impact on Corporations Virtual Summit. We hope today is an interactive event. We're going to give some of the other attendees another minute or two to join. But what I'd like to do is you should be able to see a couple things on the right-hand side of your screen. Uh, there should be a button that says chat, one that says questions with a question mark, and then one in the middle that says polls. I've populated a poll to try to understand maybe where folks in the audience would like to go on their next holiday. Just to make sure everything's working, if you don't mind replying to that, let us know what you plan to do with your next holiday. Looking like a lot of us are planning to go someplace warm or by the ocean or sea. I'll let a couple more responses come back in. As I do that, again, for those of you just kind of joining with us now, I'm Eric Joyce. I'm the Director of Sustainability here at PreScouter, handling more of our commercial relationships with our clients. We want to thank all of you for your commitment and efforts to more sustainable commerce and trying to get ahead of maybe some of the impacts that COP26 might have on your businesses or organizations. We expect today to be a very efficient and informative session. But again, hopefully you'll also interact with us. There's a question button at the bottom. We'd like throughout the conference today, the summit today, we hope you'll ask questions that then we'll take the last 5 or 10 minutes to answer. One last poll before we get started is trying to get a little bit better understanding of what you'd like to get out of this session today. So do you have specific questions you came here hoping to understand how some of the talk and headlines from COP26 might impact your organization? Are you just trying to understand better, what might be coming out of that generally, or something else? Please let us know, and I'll try to give everybody an understanding of where the responses are falling. It looks mostly like we're looking at general guidance, but we've got a few specific questions. So again, would love to see you put those questions in the question button at the bottom. So give people another minute here to join, and I'll start introducing Baishakhi. We hope all of you stay tuned for the end of the call. You'll also be receiving an email invite to jump on a complimentary session with one of our sustainability experts like Baishakhi, who I'll introduce here in a second. That way we can answer any specific questions you have directly to you, those that you might not want to ask in front of the group. So I have the pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine, Baishakhi Sengupta, one of PreScouter's sustainability experts. A little background on her: while tasked with leading sustainability efforts over the last 2 decades, both as an employee and a consultant, she's grown her experience driving the right KPIs for businesses to achieve decarbonization. Over this time, she's overseen operations over 50 countries, public and private organizations, leading inventory and reporting work, target setting, analysis, as well as emission reduction projects and opportunities, regularly resulting in 7-figure year-over-year savings for her employees and clients. Baishakhi has received a number of awards, some of which, the British Standards Institute National Case Study on Successes of Implementing ISO 50001 Work to Drive Decarbonization, Eddy Sustainability Award 2019, and as a guest speaker at Eddy Live. Baishakhi is widely known in the industry for expertise in sustainability and serves as advisor to the UK Parliament and senior officers in the UK Environmental Agency. One last final reminder: please use that question button at the bottom. We'll be looking to answer some of your specific questions at the end of the call today. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Baishakhi. Take it away.
Thanks, Eric, for a really glorifying introduction. I was just thinking that this is a unique experience to be able to talk to attendees, global attendees, actually, because I think we have attendees from a number of different countries joining us today, where I get the privilege of sharing my insight about COP26. So without further ado, I'm going to go through to the slides. So as we know, COP26 was held in Glasgow in November, and there are some key takeaways from it. So I've been working in this sector for nearly 2 decades, and disruption to business as usual is more boardroom common topic now than it was 10, 15 years ago. And climate change, biodiversity loss, and the pandemic seems to be the common topics being talked at board level. And there are a number of different reasons for it. It's an established scientific fact now that the Earth is going through anthropogenic caused global warming, and the nationally determined contributions made by countries that have committed to the Paris Agreement are not going to be enough to keep global temperatures at an optimum level required for us to carry on business as usual. So if we look at the infographic on the right, the current policy and actions, if we carried on or cruised, as they say, then before we know it, say beyond 2040, we will have locked in quite a bit of warming. So the global average temperature is definitely going to cross 1.5 degrees between 2035 to 2040. And that was confirmed in the IPCC's 6th assessment report published in August this year, with high probability or likelihood. They reckon, well, there are hundreds of scientists who supported the report. So there's a high probability it will happen between 95 to 97%, they say, that it's likely to happen. What that also means is because of the greenhouse gases emitted across various sectors, is going to be a bit volatile and may affect the atmosphere in various ways. We will have locked in a warming of probably more than 2.7 to 3 degrees. So what that will impact on, I'll touch upon in the next few slides, but that has driven the United Nations and other multilateral organizations to think, well, net zero is no longer a nice thing to do. It's got to be standardized so that the non-state sectors, which is private organizations with more than 500 employees, need to start making disclosures about, so that there is a standard protocol and there is less of greenwashing. The Task Force for Climate Change Disclosures was made mandatory by the G7 countries in May earlier this year. So it is definitely required for reporting for example, financial institutions, pension funds, private equity funds, etc. this year. And starting next year, it'll be all the companies listed on FTSE in London, Dow Jones, so on and so forth, and includes large businesses with more than 500 million turnover. So I'm presuming the attendees at today's webinar are probably the ones that will be impacted by these policy changes coming our way. Carbon border tax is something that's being discussed by Christine Lagarde at European Central Bank quite a bit. North America is opposed to it because it impacts how you trade with Europe, what commodities you buy, what you sell, etc., etc. However, it is very likely to come in because it's widely recognized as one policy mechanism that might help to hold people accountable for delivering net zero. Carbon labeling has been discussed at European Commission level for a while and is being adopted or replicated in the UK under the Sustainability Disclosures Regulations. It's at a draft stage now. However, it is highly likely it will come in as a reporting requirement by December 2022. The global net zero standard that the UN is looking to establish through the ISO standards and will probably be adopted by the national standards advising agencies such as BSI in the UK by, again, December 2022. So the next 12 months, we'll see quite a few transitional changes that businesses will face. So I talked about sustainability disclosures requirements. What is it? So it basically includes organizations disclosing the embodied carbon of products they sell. Now, you could decide to do certain specific energy intensive or carbon intensive parts of your product, or you could do the whole thing. Either way, banks and financial institutions will be forced to look at asset level greenhouse gas emissions, and they will be relying on companies or investments per se to release that information so that carbon taxation at global regional level can be homogenized. This is kind of linked to ESG reporting, and I'll come on to that in a bit. I have undertaken carbon labeling quite a bit. There are different standards to follow. Carbon Trust in the UK has its own product footprint standard, but the International Standards Agency obviously has its own standard, ISO 14067. It's looking through different methodologies for every sector. The product labeling might be slightly different. And again, if you have queries or you have demands from your customers to already start along this journey, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll be very happy to share our experience on that. So move on to the next poll. Is your organization ready to implement carbon labeling because it may come in through a policy requirement? Is that a yes, no, or not sure? And if you could please participate in that, and then Eric could let us know the polls, please.
Yep, we've got pretty even more not sures are coming in. We've got a couple no's and about 10%, just under 10% say yes. And I'll update these at the end as well.
Okay. Moving on. So there are other takeaways from COP26, including what has happened over the last 10 to 13 years. So in 2007, the Nicholas Stern report on climate change was published in the UK, which cascaded a number of different climate change related, mainly from a mitigation perspective, rules and regulations. On the left-hand side of the graph is basically an infographic, what was in that report, suggesting that the worst case scenarios of climate change is likely to hit us beyond 2050 and closer to 2100. And even the GDP at risk was given a very sort of like neutral perspective. However, if you've read the IPCC report or heard the COP26 discussions, the business as usual and GDP at stake is quite real. So the graphs on the right suggests that if we cross 1.5 degrees, there is 20 trillion at stake. If we cross 2.5 degrees, which is the kind of warming we will have locked in before the end of the century, there's 44 trillion. But based on my empirical research, I can tell you that these are also conservative estimates. Once we cross the 1.5 degree trajectory, there will be an N number of nonlinear impacts that will affect businesses and disruption in their supply chain, commodities you buy. It could be based on, how the local climate changes. If you rely on natural resources such as agriculture, that is a high chance of disruption in terms of how much crop you'll get, where the yield will be, rainfall and other extreme weather patterns, what that's going to do. So the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is that as a futuristic business, you should use this as an opportunity to plan for resilience. So I'll share some examples of where I have brought innovative examples, opportunities for clients to take, really deal with building business resilience and where they have ignored what the consequences have been. So there was a reason to look at decarbonisation strategy and to look at renewable energy, on-site generation versus corporate PPA, et cetera. However, because it wasn't a priority, because every business has a finite fund and what they want to do with it, or their different business strategies they want to follow, depends on who's leading at board level, et cetera. So there was a delay in making a decision. And now post-pandemic, I'm sure most businesses will have seen that there is a huge gap in the supply chain. So even though this business now wants to explore solar, there will be a good 12 to 18 months plus gap by the time they're able to get on with it, because there is always a lead time with placing an order and what happens from there on. So they will be exposed to market volatility for procuring energy for a good 18 months, and they might be out of pocket because what they've budgeted for procurement will be out of sync with what their expectations are. Another example being, I had advised a client to look at circular economy for using a different commodity within their product making, and talked about using different type of packaging as well. as well as using a different commodity that they could create on site for. So anyway, that was again 4 years ahead of its age. Roll on all the changes because of what's happening in the climate as well as policy changes. This client now is desperate to adopt those innovation technologies. However, the technology provider they're relying on is not going to be ready again for 18 months or so to provide that to them. So now they are having to still buy from the old supplier at 6 to 8 times more per unit of that product. So disruption because of all these changes is likely to erode some of your profitability. And therefore, it is quite important that you plan for business resilience. So on to my next poll. I'm stalling... Is stalling a sustainability-related investment or project a current issue within your company? This is a very common thing that I come across across my clients, and just wondered whether it was a yes, no, or sometimes for you. And I'll leave it to Eric to let us know the poll results.
Yep. A little bit, 60% say sometimes, about 25% plus say yes. And about 15%, the numbers are changing a little bit on me, say no. Maybe Baishakhi, you've got some ideas on how to keep that from happening?
I think what works for me at board level is to talk in the language that is what the board wants to hear. So never mind, good to do for the planet and all of that. A lot of time that works is converting your conversation into business risks, currency, long-term planning, what would be the impact on your P&L, what could be the opportunity for business growth as well if you adopted these tactics and sustainability. So if you start revolving your discussions around those, you're likely to get a lot more support from the board to get ahead with those planning. So what are the other near-term consequences for mandatory standards post COP26? As I've already shared some examples of climate risks which need to be quantified. I mean, we've seen ourselves in the last 12 to 24 months that random climate extremes have happened. What happened in Texas was a bizarre case of polar vortex meandering because a certain layer in the stratosphere had warmed up far too quicker than it does naturally, which caused the trade winds to meander, and therefore the polar vortex happened, which plunged temperatures in Texas, which is really in the tropics, to like sub-zero temperatures and caused quite a bit of havoc. I think some power companies went out of business as well because they couldn't keep up with their claims. There was also a town in Canada in the Arctic Circle that went up in flames in 15 minutes. I've seen videos of the survivors, and it's absolutely bizarre for that to happen, in the Arctic belt in the summer where temperatures don't usually cross more than 20 degrees. So we are seeing quite a bit of volatility along with that policy changes. So it's time to really tighten up your belts and prepare for certain other things. So apart from carbon labeling, TCFD reporting, etc., there is a high chance of ESG reporting across the globe to be standardized. So the EU Green Taxonomy is being followed and adopted in UK, I think in New Zealand and Australia as well. Rumor has it that parts of South Africa and South America are also look at ESG metrics because the financial community globally is really looking at a way where they can reduce their financial risks because climate risks are really, the tragedy of the horizon. So the closer we are to quantifying what those are, even to reduce our exposure, that would be the best thing to do for futuristic businesses. TCFD disclosures, as I mentioned, have already started, and larger businesses will be, we'll have to get on with it beyond 6th April 2022. Depends when your financial year is. Higher carbon taxes are definitely likely to hit energy-intensive sectors or high embodied carbon products. I was recently at a discussion forum, the Chatham House in UK, which advises the government on various independent policies to think about decarbonisation, and they picked a product, trainers, to actually show that there is no one silver bullet to getting to decarbonisation. People always talk about power companies or oil and gas companies or food manufacturing companies as really carbon intense, but it's across the spectrum that one has to look in every sector to be able to get that, so that globally we're in a position where we've reduced and mapped our risks. Next poll. Is TCFD reporting something you are doing or planning to do in-house? Outsourcing to a third party, not sure yet.
And give me a second to see some of those answers. About 60%, no or not sure. About 20, and then split almost evenly. 20% yes in-house and 20% outsourced to a third party.
That's really interesting because TCFG reporting is a complex landscape, and I've got a couple of points in my next few slides that I can share to hopefully give you share some of my perspective as well. So as part of sharing with you what COP26 is bringing for businesses, PreScouters 5, I mean, these are not set in stone. We're just sharing what would be the basic steps to be taken by businesses that want to become resilient, really prepare for the future and stay ahead of the curve. So in my experience, baseline assessment is the first starting process. Whether you use Greenhouse Gas Protocol or you use another ISO standard to completely see, you know, like crawling underneath the skin of the organization, where is your performance now, so that you know where the starting line is to plan ahead. Reviewing your strategy and governance documents. I mean, most of the businesses attending here will be at different stages of your sustainability strategy. But with these policy changes, etc., coming in, I think this is a good time for you to review where your strategy and governance process is, because, for example, in TCFD, you will be asked for different layers of governance disclosures in terms of how skilled or technically qualified is your board representative in making climate change risk assessments or decisions. And then obviously there's fiduciary duty in terms of the decisions they take in the best interest of the business for 10, 15, 20-year lifetime. How do they, prioritize mitigation adaptation actions? So, looking at the infographic on the right-hand side of the slide, scenario analysis is something that I would highly recommend to prepare for all of this, even with your net zero strategy, because as the Earth goes through various layers of warming, there'll be different layers of risks that will come, both as physical risks to geographical locations where you are, depending on where you are in the planet. For example, if you're in Jakarta, there are, quite a few random risks there in terms of not just sea level rising, but that there's land subsidence as well. So on and so forth. You will be aware that 1.5 degree warming will be catastrophic for coral reefs and therefore marine biodiversity and the fishing industry per se, as well as tourism. So if you have assets in those lovely luxurious hotels and atolls and stuff, you need to start planning now for adaptation around those. Transitional risks, as I mentioned, there's quite a few different policies, etc., changes coming. So layering those based on which region you work under, where your assets are, etc., would really help. And I would suggest you build up from site level to group level your strategy piece. Look at heat mapping the climate risks that you've got. And I've got my next slide is based on that. And not just concentrate on decarbonization and mitigation, but also balance adaptation plans, because I think we're at a stage whereby we're very close to a tipping point. And if we don't start, for example, investing in soil conservation, investing in the community woodlands, investing in, say, for example, for coffee growers, they need to start investing in their plantations a lot more so that they're able to, get the returns they depend on nature for. Then, because all of this will take a decade at least for the returns to happen, because nature is forgiving, but you need to start planning now. This is just an example of heat mapping of risks, and you could layer it the way you want or keep it as simple as you want. You could start with doing a materiality assessment on what SASB requires vis-a-vis GRI and CDP. If you sort of work across different regions, you could also decide to do stakeholder analysis in-house as well as externally, and pick a shopping list of 10 things you want to prioritize, and then rank them based on subjective scoring on likelihood versus impact. But for climate risks, it would be wise to probably rank the scoring based on impact, likelihood, vulnerability of where your locations are, and the speed of onset of that risk, which will help you prioritize where the biggest gains could be on taking action. So I would highly recommend you adopt the heat mapping exercise as you see fit, but it will be very critical also to show robustly in your annual report how seriously you've worked on your sustainability strategy disclosures. So I think I'm at the end of my presentation. I'm going to hand over to Eric to go through a couple of other things. Eric, over to you for this one.
Yep. So, yes. Can you hear me? I turned my video off because I was having some connection issues. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, good. So a couple of the questions that came in is carbon labeling only for packaged goods like sold at a retail location or industrial products also? Baishakhi, yeah.
Could you repeat that again? Sorry, I got distracted reading a question on the chat.
Yeah, that's okay. Is carbon labeling only for packaged goods like those sold at a retail location, or might other industrial products and other goods need to be labeled?
Carbon labeling will literally be everywhere in everything. So a couple of years ago when I was traveling in America, I noticed that Starbucks was selling coffee with a little anecdote saying, if you really care about the environment and want us to invest in our community, etc., which I think is really critical, because if, for example, the earth keeps getting hotter like it is, there will be no coffee beyond 2050 or will be reduced. Therefore, we will be paying a lot more for a very easily available commodity. And they were only going to charge 5 or 10 cents to invest back in the community. So they were also telling us the carbon footprint of that cup of coffee. So I think carbon labeling, carbon disclosures, carbon accounting like this will become very common because, for example, whether financial institutions, I mean, ultimately, it's money that makes the world go around, right? So if that is at risk, whether at GDP level or at asset class level, we need to get better at understanding what those are to manage them. And I think carbon labeling is widely recognized as one of the ways to quantify those risks.
Great. And please, just another reminder, submit questions on the right-hand side. If you click on questions, and there's a blue button that says ask a new question. We have another question about how do you see privately held companies, not publicly traded, maybe currently no equity investors being impacted by some of these ESG requirements?
So I do have clients who are not all private equity held, and even they're feeling the pressure of ESG reporting, although they've not undertaken it so far. They're just at the cusp of exploring that because ultimately, at the end of the day, we have banks that we borrow from. All businesses have some sort of loans, some assured, some non-assured, etc. I have quite a few clients who are privately financed, but yes, they do have some loans from the bank. So it's those banks that have started asking questions around what do you do with your greenhouse gas accounting? What standard do you follow? Is it audited, verified? Can you give us last year's and the last 24 months so that we can trend it? They've also started asking on other issues such as water. How do we manage that in drought-prone areas? Biodiversity is also coming up for question on the E aspect of the ESG. And I've also noticed that FTSE Russell are offering, that's obviously for public traded companies, ESG verification. I've come across some other audit verification companies offering ESG certification. I have contributed to some papers with PCAF, which is the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, and EFAS, which is the European Association for ESG-related professionals. And it's interesting that they're all in agreement that the ESG spectrum needs to be homogenized so that there's less greenwashing, because they reckon that probably of globally disclosed information, less than 50% is accurate. So I think this is going to be a growing trend. And even if, privately held companies are not directly having to disclose them right now, this is coming through either sustainability disclosures requirements in legislation or through banks. It's coming one way or the other as compliance reporting.
Yeah, and I'd say what we're hearing also is they're being pushed by their clients, right? Even if they don't sell to consumers and the end consumer is looking for more sustainable products, they're part of the supply chain of another organization that is doing more ESG
Yeah.
reporting, target setting, and so they're putting pressure on their suppliers. But one last question on Baishakhi, are you able to see it in the chat from
Yeah.
Virginia about the heat map? If you want to cover that here
Um,
or take that offline.
Okay, maybe I'll take that offline. There was another question from Kerry Romanow asking how can cities help and lead? So that's at a very macro scale. I'm presuming that you represent a local government there. So what again, I would go back to the 5 steps that we talked about. So baseline assessment of what a local government or authority services are. Following the greenhouse gas protocol, and there is one standard for local authorities that we've looked at for our clients, and looking at scope 1 and 2 emissions first, because the scope 3 is the most complex bit. So you start taking some steps, like, you know, in accounting and defining the boundary of work first, because obviously cities can be complex organizations where you have a lot of third parties operating, such as airports, trains, you know, transport, food production, whatnot going on. So there's a lot of opportunity for partnership and community work as well to get towards net zero. And I think the planning team of local authorities have a big role to play to get there, to stipulate sustainability ratings, maybe for new builds, both commercial and residential dwellings. I suppose I could go on and on, but I'll just keep it to this. But feel free to reach out to us if there's anything else that you want to query.
Yep. And I would say, Carrie, we also work with a number of, we've actually done it for a couple of governmental bodies where they want to look at what incentives have been successful in fostering, let's say, more sustainable activities and investment in their region or location. So many ways that cities and governments can lead. That's it. Thank you, everybody, today for joining our session. We hope it was informative. We'll be sending you in about 10 or 15 minutes the recording to download if you want to look back and hear any of Baishakhi's answers. We'll send some of the slides as well. And then also we're, again, offering a complimentary 30-minute conversation with Baishakhi or one of our other subject matter experts in the sustainability space, depending on where you're located, to answer any other specific questions and see if there might be alignment with the work we do and some of the areas you might have need. Again, thank you all for your interest in more sustainable commerce, and we hope you have a great rest of your day and holiday season. Thanks so much, Baishakhi.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye.